I was tracking the international arbitrage flows when the most extraordinary price divergence in modern commodity history revealed itself through encrypted communications from precious metals dealers operating across three continents, a revelation so profound that it fundamentally challenged every assumption about global market integration and price discovery mechanisms that had governed international trade for decades. Monday, December 23rd, 2025, 7:45 a.m. Hong Kong time, the moment I confirmed that physical silver was trading at the equivalent of $105.30 per ounce on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, while COMEX futures in New York continued to quote paper contracts at 76.15, creating a staggering 29.15 arbitrage gap that was systematically draining Western vault inventories and redirecting global silver flows toward Asian industrial buyers whose procurement strategies had completely overwhelmed traditional market mechanisms. The mathematical impossibility of this price differential existing in a normally functioning global market had created the largest wealth transfer opportunity in precious metals history, while simultaneously exposing the complete breakdown of the financial infrastructure that was supposed to ensure price equilibrium across geographic regions through arbitrage trading, that would normally eliminate such obvious profit opportunities within hours, rather than allowing them to persist and expand over multiple trading sessions. The discovery process had begun 3 weeks earlier when my network of international dealers started reporting unusual pricing anomalies that initially appeared to be temporary dislocations caused by holiday trading volumes and reduced arbitrage activity, but which gradually revealed themselves as systematic structural changes in how physical silver was being allocated between Eastern and Western markets through strategic procurement programs that bypassed traditional commodity exchange mechanisms entirely. Shanghai's silver market had transformed into a feeding frenzy of industrial desperation as Chinese technology manufacturers, solar panel producers, and electric vehicle companies competed aggressively for diminishing supplies while implementing strategic reserve accumulation programs that treated silver acquisition as a matter of national economic security rather than routine industrial procurement. BYD Auto had reportedly allocated $2.8 billion specifically for silver stockpiling operations designed to secure 5 years of battery production requirements ahead of anticipated supply shortages that could threaten their electric vehicle manufacturing expansion plans. LONGi Solar Technology had established a $1.9 billion strategic metals procurement division specifically dedicated to securing silver supplies for their photovoltaic manufacturing operations that required approximately 20 million ounces annually for optimal production efficiency. The company had signed exclusive supply agreements with 7 primary silver mining operations across Mexico, Peru, and Argentina, effectively removing 65 million ounces from global commodity markets annually through direct producer relationships that bypassed traditional trading mechanisms entirely. Xiaomi Corporation had surprised industry observers by announcing a $1.2 billion silver acquisition program designed to secure component supplies for their expanding electronics manufacturing operations, smartphone production lines, and Internet of Things device assembly that required substantial silver quantities for optimal electrical performance and reliability characteristics that could not be achieved through alternative materials without significant performance compromises. Alibaba Group had established a strategic materials division with $2.5 billion in allocated capital, specifically for securing critical technology materials including silver for their cloud computing infrastructure expansion, data center construction projects, and artificial intelligence hardware development that required high-performance electrical components manufactured with precious metals for optimal conductivity and thermal management capabilities. Geely Automotive had implemented a comprehensive strategic materials procurement strategy with $1.8 billion dedicated to silver acquisition for their electric vehicle production expansion and autonomous driving technology development that required sophisticated electronic systems incorporating substantial silver quantities for optimal electrical performance, electromagnetic compatibility, and long-term reliability under extreme operating conditions. Contemporary Amperex Technology, CATL, the world's largest battery manufacturer, had established direct purchasing relationships with primary silver mining operations in Mexico and Peru, offering premium payments exceeding spot prices by 40–50% in exchange for guaranteed delivery quantities that removed substantial production volumes from global commodity markets before the metal could reach exchange warehouses or dealer inventories that served Western customers. Tencent Holdings had surprised market observers by announcing a $1.5 billion strategic metals acquisition program focused on securing silver supplies for their expanding data center operations and cloud computing infrastructure that required massive quantities of high-conductivity materials for server manufacturing and cooling system components that could not be substituted with alternative materials without significant performance degradation. The collective impact of these Chinese industrial procurement strategies had created an unprecedented demand concentration in Asian markets that was absorbing virtually all available silver supplies through off-market transactions that avoided traditional commodity exchange reporting requirements, while simultaneously offering pricing premiums that Western dealers could not match without abandoning their traditional business models entirely. Western precious metals dealers were experiencing an inventory crisis, unlike anything in their operational history, as their normal supplier networks proved incapable of replenishing stock at anything resembling reasonable cost structures. Major American bullion distributors, including APMEX, JM Bullion, and SD Bullion, had implemented allocation protocols limiting individual customer purchases, while simultaneously raising premiums to 95.98 per ounce, despite COMEX paper quotations that suggested silver should be readily available at substantially lower prices. The operational disruption had reached catastrophic levels as dealers discovered that their traditional wholesale suppliers were either completely sold out or demanding immediate payment at prices that exceeded retail selling prices by 15–20%, creating impossible economic conditions where dealers faced certain losses on every transaction, while simultaneously disappointing customers who had placed orders based on advertised pricing that was no longer economically viable. Miles Franklin Precious Metals had suspended new customer orders entirely after their primary supplier informed them that replacement silver would cost $102 per ounce for immediate delivery, making it impossible to honor existing customer commitments at previously quoted prices while maintaining any profit margin whatsoever. The company's CEO had issued a public statement explaining that normal business operations had become impossible when wholesale costs exceeded retail pricing by substantial margins. Provident Metals had implemented emergency rationing protocols limiting customers to maximum purchases of 100 ounces while extending delivery timeframes to 16 to 20 weeks as they attempted to source replacement inventory through alternative channels that were proving increasingly expensive and unreliable. Their procurement team reported that traditional suppliers were prioritizing Asian buyers who offered immediate payment at premium prices rather than honoring existing supply agreements with American distributors. Golden State Mint had temporarily closed their retail operations while conducting a comprehensive review of their supply chain relationships that had been completely disrupted by the Asian buying surge that was redirecting available silver toward overseas customers offering superior economics. Their manufacturing operations continued serving existing industrial contracts, but consumer sales had become economically unfeasible given current wholesale market conditions. The physical market disconnect had become so extreme that several major dealers had temporarily suspended operations rather than accept delivery commitments they knew they could not fulfill at quoted pricing, creating unprecedented scarcity conditions in Western retail markets, while Asian industrial buyers continued aggressive accumulation campaigns that prioritized supply security over cost optimization in recognition that silver availability had become more critical than silver pricing for maintaining production schedules. European precious metals markets had exhibited similar stress patterns as London-based dealers reported that their traditional sources of silver inventory, primarily large refineries and institutional vault operators, were redirecting their output toward Asian customers offering immediate payment at premium prices, rather than honoring existing supply relationships with European distributors who were constrained by traditional pricing structures and credit terms that had become economically unviable in the new market environment. The London Bullion Market Association's daily silver fixing had become increasingly irrelevant as a price discovery mechanism, because the actual trading that determined the fix was occurring between financial institutions trading paper claims rather than industrial end users acquiring physical metal for manufacturing applications, creating a fundamental disconnect between theoretical pricing and practical availability that was unprecedented in modern commodity markets. Swiss refineries, historically the backbone of global precious metals processing and distribution, were facing impossible economic calculations, as their input costs for raw silver materials had reached levels that exceeded their traditional customer pricing by substantial margins, forcing them to choose between maintaining traditional business relationships and adapting to new market realities that required completely different operational and pricing strategies. Heraeus Precious Metals, one of Europe's largest silver refiners, had reportedly suspended new customer commitments while implementing a strategic review of their allocation priorities that would likely result in substantially reduced supply availability for Western markets as they redirected processing capacity toward Asian customers, offering superior economics and guaranteed volume commitments that provided operational stability during unprecedented market volatility. Pamp Suisse had implemented similar protective measures, informing existing customers that delivery timeframes had extended from typical 2-4-week periods to 12 to 16-week estimates due to input material scarcity and increased processing demands from Asian industrial buyers whose procurement requirements had overwhelmed global refining capacity that had been calibrated for historical demand patterns rather than the current structural transformation. The arbitrage mathematics had become so extreme that professional trading operations were deploying substantial capital resources to capture the obvious profit opportunities, but were discovering that the physical logistics of moving silver from west to east involved complexities and delays that prevented rapid arbitrage execution, while the price differentials continued expanding rather than converging toward normal market equilibrium levels. Air freight capacity for precious metal shipments had become critically constrained as multiple arbitrage operations competed for limited cargo space on flights from New York, London, and Zurich to Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Singapore, creating transportation bottlenecks that added additional costs and delays to arbitrage operations while the underlying price differential continued expanding at rates that exceeded the logistical capacity to exploit the opportunity effectively. Insurance costs for international silver shipments had increased dramatically as underwriters recognized the elevated risks associated with transporting high-value cargoes during periods of extreme market volatility and geopolitical tension, creating additional arbitrage barriers that prevented normal market forces from eliminating price differentials through competitive trading activities that would typically restore market equilibrium within days rather than weeks or months. The banking infrastructure supporting international precious metals trade had proven inadequate for processing the massive payment volumes and complex settlement requirements associated with arbitrage operations at current market scales, creating operational bottlenecks that delayed trade execution while prices continued moving in directions that either enhanced or eliminated profit opportunities, depending on timing factors beyond traders' control. The Federal Reserve's analysis of the situation had identified systemic risks to dollar-denominated commodity markets as Asian buyers demonstrated increasing willingness to bypass traditional dollar-based trading mechanisms in favor of direct bilateral arrangements that eliminated Western financial intermediaries while providing superior pricing and supply security for industrial buyers whose procurement decisions had acquired strategic rather than purely economic characteristics. The Treasury Department's assessment had concluded that the silver market disruption represented a broader challenge to American financial market leadership, as traditional commodity trading centers in New York and Chicago proved incapable of maintaining price discovery authority when confronted by concentrated industrial demand from economically motivated buyers whose strategic imperatives transcended normal profit optimization considerations. The Pentagon's Strategic Materials Analysis had classified silver as a critical national security asset whose availability could not be guaranteed through normal market mechanisms during periods when foreign industrial buyers possessed superior purchasing power and strategic coordination capabilities that enabled them to systematically acquire American-produced materials for foreign industrial applications that could disadvantage American manufacturers requiring the same materials. The State Department's Trade Policy Review had identified the silver market disruption as symptomatic of broader challenges to American economic influence, as Asian economies demonstrated increasing capability to redirect global commodity flows through strategic procurement that operated independently of traditional Western financial market mechanisms and pricing authorities. The Commerce Department's Industrial Competitiveness Study had warned that continued silver supply diversion toward Asian markets could threaten American technology manufacturing capabilities as domestic producers faced increasing difficulty securing adequate materials for semiconductor, solar panel, and electric vehicle production that required silver components for optimal performance and reliability characteristics. The Environmental Protection Agency's Renewable Energy Transition Analysis had identified silver supply constraints as a potential bottleneck for American clean energy deployment, as solar panel manufacturing required substantial silver quantities that were becoming increasingly difficult to secure at economically viable pricing through traditional domestic supply channels. The Department of Energy's grid modernization planning had recognized silver availability as a critical constraint for smart grid infrastructure deployment and energy storage system manufacturing that required high conductivity materials for optimal electrical performance in applications where alternative materials could not provide equivalent functionality. The pension fund positioning analysis had revealed that major institutional investors were preparing massive capital deployments into precious metals during January 2026 portfolio rebalancing operations that could amplify current supply shortages while simultaneously creating additional upward pressure on prices that were already exceeding historical precedents by unprecedented margins. CalPERS, the California Public Employees Retirement System, had reportedly allocated $8.5 billion for strategic metals acquisition as part of their 2026 portfolio diversification strategy, representing institutional buying power that could absorb substantial silver quantities while providing price support during any temporary market corrections that might occur during normal volatility cycles. The Teacher Retirement System of Texas had announced similar allocation increases, designating $4.2 billion for precious metals investments that would likely focus on physical silver, given its superior performance characteristics compared to gold during periods of industrial demand growth and technological transformation that increased utilization requirements across multiple economic sectors simultaneously. The Norway Government Pension Fund Global had indicated their intention to increase commodity exposure substantially during 2026, with silver receiving particular attention due to its essential role in renewable energy infrastructure that aligned with their environmental sustainability investment criteria while providing portfolio diversification benefits during periods of financial market uncertainty. The Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board had established a $3.8 billion strategic metals allocation that would likely generate substantial silver demand during first quarter 2026 implementation as institutional procurement competed with industrial buyers for available supplies that were already constrained by existing demand from Asian technology manufacturers and renewable energy developers. The arbitrage flow analysis had demonstrated that approximately 85 million ounces of silver had been redirected from Western markets toward Asian buyers during December 2025, representing roughly 10% of annual global mine production, and effectively removing a substantial portion of available supplies from traditional dealer networks and exchange inventories that served Western customers. This massive inventory transfer was occurring through sophisticated logistical networks that bypassed normal commodity trading channels while providing Asian buyers with direct access to mining production, refinery output, and vault inventories that had historically served Western markets through established distribution relationships that were being systematically disrupted by superior pricing and volume commitments from Eastern buyers. The wealth transfer implications were staggering in scope and permanence as Western investors found themselves competing for diminishing silver supplies at artificially suppressed paper market prices, while Asian industrial buyers secured strategic reserves through direct relationships that provided guaranteed access at premium pricing that reflected actual scarcity conditions rather than manipulated financial market quotations. The January 2026 setup was becoming increasingly favorable for explosive price appreciation as institutional capital inflows, combined with continued Asian industrial demand, to create unprecedented buying pressure that would likely overwhelm remaining Western vault inventories while forcing paper market pricing to converge with physical market realities that had already been established in Asian markets where actual silver changed hands for immediate delivery. The fundamental transformation was irreversible, as global silver flows had been permanently redirected toward Asian markets that valued silver's strategic industrial properties rather than treating it as a speculative financial instrument, ensuring that future pricing would be determined by industrial necessity rather than financial market manipulation that had historically suppressed prices below levels that reflected actual scarcity and strategic importance. The paper market infrastructure in Western financial centers was becoming increasingly irrelevant as price discovery shifted toward physical markets where real metal transactions occurred between industrial buyers and sellers who understood silver's critical role in technological applications that generated hundreds of billions in economic value while requiring guaranteed material availability regardless of short-term pricing fluctuations. The new paradigm had established Asian markets as the primary determinant of global silver pricing through their demonstrated willingness to pay premium rates for guaranteed supply access, effectively ending the era when Western financial institutions could influence commodity pricing through derivative trading that was disconnected from actual physical supply and demand relationships that determined real availability. The East-West arbitrage gap represented more than a temporary market dislocation. It was the visible manifestation of a complete restructuring of global commodity flows that prioritized strategic industrial requirements over traditional financial market mechanisms, establishing a new framework where material availability was determined by industrial capability rather than financial speculation that could no longer influence pricing when confronted by unlimited purchasing power focused on supply security. The mathematical implications were staggering in their permanence and scope, as the $29.15 arbitrage differential represented not merely a temporary pricing anomaly, but rather the establishment of completely separate pricing mechanisms for the same physical commodity depending on geographic location, end-use application, and buyer financial capability. This fundamental bifurcation of global markets had never occurred in modern commodity trading history, and suggested that traditional assumptions about market integration were becoming obsolete when applied to materials that had acquired strategic significance. The technological infrastructure supporting this transformation had evolved beyond traditional commodity trading mechanisms to include sophisticated logistics networks, direct producer relationships, and strategic alliance frameworks that operated independently of established financial market infrastructure. Asian industrial buyers had effectively created parallel commodity markets that provided superior supply security compared to traditional Western financial instruments that were increasingly viewed as unreliable indicators of actual material availability. The investment framework transformation had created unprecedented opportunities for individual investors who understood that physical silver ownership provided direct exposure to the most dynamic wealth transfer event in modern history, where traditional financial market mechanisms were being overwhelmed by industrial necessity that operated according to completely different economic principles. The price discovery mechanism had permanently shifted from Western paper markets to Asian physical markets, where actual supply and demand relationships determined pricing through real transactions involving immediate delivery rather than derivative contracts that created artificial liquidity without corresponding physical availability. This fundamental change meant that future silver pricing would be determined by industrial capability rather than financial market speculation. The wealth creation potential for early recognition of this transformation was extraordinary, as Western investors who secured physical silver before paper markets converged with Asian physical pricing could participate in the greatest commodity repricing event in modern history, while traditional financial institutions struggled to adapt their obsolete methodologies to new market realities that prioritized substance over speculation.